There is an old man sitting on a rock in the middle of the sea. The rock is barely an island. It is volcanic, treeless, scorched pale by a sun that does not soften here. Rome sends people to places like this when it wants them to disappear. Not to kill them, just to erase them, to let the salt and the silence do the slow work instead. The man has a name the whole church once knew. Now he has a sentence. And he has the sound of the waves, which never stop, and never change, and never answer back. If you were there, you would be listening too. He is listening anyway. Because somewhere above that bright, blank sky, somewhere past the gulls and the heat and the empty blue, there is a door. He does not know it yet. But one ordinary day, on this forgotten rock, that door is going to open, and a voice is going to say 2 words that will pull him clean out of his exile and up into something no human eye was built to hold. We will get to that door. But not yet. First, you need to understand how rare a thing this is. Because this is not a story about clouds. This is not a story about angels with harps. This is not a story about a warm feeling you get in a quiet church on a good morning. This is a story about the few, the genuinely few, moments in all of Scripture when the ceiling of the world actually came apart, when the wall between the place you can see and the place you cannot tore open, and a real person, standing in a real moment, looked straight up into it. It almost never happens. And here is what most people miss. Every single time it does, it lands on someone at the lowest point of their life. A man running for his life. A man who lost his country. A man dying under a pile of stones. Heaven does not open over palaces. It opens over breaking points. So let's go back to the very first crack in the sky. Long before the rock in the sea. Long before the door. His name was Jacob, and he was running. He had stolen something that could not be returned. His brother's blessing, lifted by a trick, with a goatskin on his arm and a lie in his mouth. Now Esau wanted him dead, and Jacob was alone on the road north with nothing. No tent, no servant, no goodbye, just the clothes he wore, and the distance he could put between himself and a brother who had promised to kill him. Imagine you have nothing but a stone. When the sun went down, he stopped in the open country, and he did what a man does when he has nothing. He found a stone. He put it under his head, and he slept on the ground like the fugitive he was. And that is the night the sky opened over him. He saw a stairway, set on the earth, its top reaching all the way into heaven, and on it, the angels of God were going up and coming down. Up and down, between this world and that one, on a road no human had ever been allowed to see. At the top stood the Lord himself, speaking a promise over the worst night of Jacob's life. When he woke, he was shaking. And he said something you would never expect from a man who had just cheated his way out of his family. He said, "This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven." The gate of heaven. Over a runaway with a rock for a pillow. Notice the word he reached for. In Hebrew, the word for heaven is shamayim, and it is plural. Not the sky singular and flat. The heavens. Layered. Stacked. The ancient mind did not picture one blue ceiling. It pictured depth above depth, and somewhere up through all of it, a gate. Jacob had just seen the bottom step of it, and it terrified him. Hold that thought, the fear, because it comes back every single time. Now jump forward almost 1,000 years, and the sky opens again. But this time, not over a man running toward a future. This time, over a man who has lost everything behind him. His name was Ezekiel, and he was a priest with no temple. He had been trained for one thing, to serve in the house of God in Jerusalem. You were trained for one building, and that building is now rubble. Babylon had come, and Babylon had won, and Ezekiel had been marched hundreds of miles from the only holy place he knew, dumped with thousands of other captives beside an irrigation canal, called the Kibar. He was about 30 years old, the very age a priest was meant to begin his service. And he was sitting in the mud of a foreign empire, his calling stillborn, his city gone. That is where the heavens opened, not in the temple, in the dirt of exile. He saw a storm rolling in out of the north, wind and fire, and a brightness that hurt to look at. He saw wheels within wheels and living creatures, and above it all, a figure on a throne that he could only describe by saying what it was like, because the thing itself was beyond his words. Here is a man who had been told his whole life that God lived in one building, in one city, behind one curtain, and God came to find him in Babylon, beside a ditch, in a place the priests would have called unclean. That is the thing about every opening so far. Heaven does not wait for you to get back to the holy place. It comes to the canal. And then, 600 years after Ezekiel sat in that mud, the sky tears open one more time, and everything changes. Because for the first time, it does not open so a man can see up. It opens so heaven can come down. A carpenter from a town with a bad reputation walks into the Jordan River and asks his cousin to baptize him. The cousin, John, has been telling everyone that someone greater is coming. And as Jesus comes up out of the water, the sky does not gently part. You have to hear the violence in that word. Mark uses a violent word for it. The Greek is schizo, to tear, to rip apart. The same word the gospel writers use later for the temple curtain on the day Jesus dies. The heavens are not opened politely. They are torn. And through the tear, the Spirit comes down like a dove and settles on him. And a voice, the voice from the top of Jacob's stairway, the voice above Ezekiel's wheels, says, "This is my Son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Stay with me." Because we are only halfway up. So look at what you have seen so far. A fugitive with a stone for a pillow. A priest sitting in the mud of exile. A carpenter standing waist deep in a river. 3 men, 3 breaking points. 3 times the sky came apart, and not one of them was standing in a temple when it happened. If that pattern is doing something to you, if you want to see how far it goes, subscribe and stay with me. Because the next time heaven opens, a man is being killed while he looks into it. And after that comes the most violent tearing of all, the one out on the rock in the sea. His name was Stephen, and he was about to become the first person to die for following Jesus. He was not an apostle. He was not a famous preacher. He had been picked for something ordinary, to help distribute food to widows so the apostles could keep teaching. A waiter, really. A servant. But when he spoke about Jesus, people could not argue with him, and that made the wrong men furious. So they dragged him outside the city walls, and they picked up rocks, and they got ready to do the slow, brutal work of stoning a man to death. Picture you're in that crowd. And right then, with the first stones already in their hands, Stephen looked up. He did not look at the rocks. He did not look at the faces of the men who hated him. You would have looked away. He looked up, and the heavens opened. He saw the glory of God, and he saw Jesus. And here is the detail that has stopped readers cold for 2,000 years. He saw Jesus standing. Everywhere else in the New Testament, Jesus is seated. Seated at the right hand of the Father, the posture of a king at rest, a work that is finished. But for Stephen, he stood, as if the King of Heaven rose to his feet to watch his servant come home. Stephen said it out loud, even as the first rock found him. "Look, I see heaven open, and the Son of Man standing at the right hand of God." And there was a young man at the edge of that crowd, holding the coats of the killers so their arms were free to throw. His name was Saul. Remember him. He is watching a man stare into heaven and forgive his murderers, and something is being planted in him that will take years to break open. But it gets stranger. Because the next time heaven opens, it is not to show a dying man his home. It is to change a living man's mind. His name was Peter, and he thought he already understood God completely. He was on a rooftop in a seaside town called Joppa, around noon, and he was hungry, and he was praying. And he fell into what the Greek calls ecstasis, where we get the word ecstasy, a trance, a state of standing outside yourself. And in it, heaven opened, and something came down, a great sheet, lowered by its 4 corners, full of every kind of animal that a good Jewish man like Peter had been taught his entire life never, ever to eat. And a voice said, "Get up, Peter. Kill and eat." And Peter, who would die for Jesus, who had walked on water toward Jesus, said no, to God. You'd have said no too. Surely not, Lord. I have never eaten anything impure or unclean. 3 times the voice came. 3 times the sheet came down. And the meaning was not really about food at all. Because this is not a story about a menu. This is not a story about a strange dream on a hot afternoon. This is not a story about what a man is allowed to put in his mouth. This is the story of the moment the wall came down. The wall between the people who thought they were in and the people they had decided were out. Minutes after that vision, men sent by a Roman soldier, a Gentile, an outsider, exactly the kind of person Peter had been raised to keep at arm's length, knocked on the door downstairs. And Peter, with the open sky still burning in his memory, went with them. And the church stopped being a thing for one nation and became a thing for the whole world. Heaven opened and a wall fell down. Pay attention to that, because every opening so far has been pulling toward one thing. And we are almost there. There is one more opening before the rock in the sea, and it is the strangest of them all, because the man it happened to almost refused to talk about it. Remember Saul, the young man holding the coats while Stephen died? Heaven had a door for him too. He became Paul, the most relentless voice the early church ever had. And late in his life, defending himself against people who bragged about their spiritual experiences, he let slip something he had kept quiet for 14 years. He said he knew a man, and he meant himself. He was just too uncomfortable to say me, who was caught up to the 3rd heaven, up past the sky you can see, up past wherever Jacob's stairway ended, into the throne room itself. And what did he hear there? He won't tell you. You'd want to know what he heard, but he won't tell you. He says he heard inexpressible things, things a human being is not permitted to repeat. Think about that. The man who wrote almost half the New Testament, who could not stop writing, who filled letter after letter with words, that man came back from the open heaven and went silent. Some things you do not bring back down the stairway. He carried it for 14 years and barely let it out then. So now, finally, the rock in the sea. The old man's name was John. He was the last of them, the last living apostle, the one who had leaned against Jesus at the final supper, the one who had stood at the cross when the others ran. And now he was old, and he was alone, and Rome had exiled him to a scrap of volcanic rock in the Aegean called Patmos. The historian Josephus tells us this was exactly what Rome did with people it found inconvenient. It scattered them onto small islands and let them rot in the silence. John had outlived everyone. His friends were martyrs. His Lord had ascended. And here he sat, on a Sunday, with nothing but the sound of the sea that never stops and never answers. And then he heard a voice behind him, loud like a trumpet. He turned, and he looked, and there it was, the thing we have been climbing toward this whole time. A door, standing open in heaven. And the voice said 2 words, "Come up here." Not look up, not see this. Come up here. For every other person in this story, heaven opened and they got to look in. Jacob saw the stairway, but stayed on the ground. Ezekiel saw the wheels, but kept his feet in the mud. Stephen saw the glory, but died on the earth. But John, the lonely old man on the forgotten rock, was told to walk through. The door did not just open. It invited him in. And maybe you know something about that feeling, even if you have never seen a thing. Because there are moments, rare ones, when this solid, ordinary world goes thin. Standing beside a hospital bed in the middle of the night, holding a baby in the first minute of its life. At the edge of a grave, when the sound of the dirt makes everything else go quiet. For just a second, the wall you live behind every day feels like paper. You cannot see through it, but you can feel that there is another side. That is the smallest taste of what these men were given in full. The thin place made wide open. The wall, gone. Every one of them, the fugitive, the exile, the carpenter, the dying servant, the stubborn fisherman, the silenced apostle, the lonely old man. Every one of them was at his lowest when the sky came apart, and not one of them went looking for it. Heaven came down. Heaven always comes down. That is the thread. That is the thing nobody tells you. The openings were never about good people climbing up to find God. They were about God tearing the ceiling to come down to them. So what do you do with all of this? Here are 3 things to carry out of this video. First, heaven opens rarely, and it never opens randomly. In thousands of years of scripture, you can count the times on 2 hands. It is not a daily event. It is not a feeling you can summon. When the sky came apart, it always landed on a hinge moment. The night everything fell apart, the day a man died, the hour a wall needed to come down. Heaven is not careless with its open door. Second, every single time, it opened toward someone who could not have climbed up on their own. Not toward the powerful, not toward the holy man in the temple. It opened over a liar on the run, a captive in the mud, a servant under the stones, an old man left to die on a rock. If you have ever believed you were too far gone, too far away, too far down for heaven to bother with you, you have it exactly backward. Down is precisely where it tends to open. And third, this is the one I want you to sit with. The last door, the one John saw, it was left standing open. Read it again. He does not say a door that opened and shut. He says a door standing open in heaven. The invitation that pulled a lonely old man off a forgotten rock and up into glory was never withdrawn. It is, as far as the last page of the Bible is concerned, still open. The voice is still saying 2 words to anyone worn down enough to hear them. Come up here. So let me ask you something, and I really do read these. Of every opening in this video, Jacob's stairway, the torn sky over the Jordan, Stephen's standing king, the door over Patmos, which one would you have wanted to stand beneath? Tell me below. I read every single comment. There is still an old man on a rock somewhere in the middle of the sea, but he is not looking at the waves anymore. He has heard the trumpet. He has turned around. And the door, the one we have been climbing toward this entire time, is open. It was always going to be open. It still is.